Hello everyone, it's your instructor Lisa Gabrielle for Digital Imaging Online, and this is the first of several lectures I'll be producing for this class. And in this lecture I would like to cover some startup activities and things that you will be involved in throughout the course of the class. It's the textbook, which I have right here on the screen, is the textbook for the class, and I'm on chapter 1 here, which is getting to know the work area. And traditionally, when I teach this class face to face, I go through this chapter with the students and I go through all of the startup areas, like for instance how to set up your panels and how to get started with the tool sets and so on and so forth. However, since this is an online class, I won't be doing that, but what I will say is that you should take it upon yourself to go through this chapter on your own and follow through the lesson. It says here it takes about 90 minutes to get through it. It should be the most important chapter you do because it sort of gets you started with understanding the interface of Photoshop, where things are, kind of like the lay of the land, so to speak. I'm just going to click through here. It sort of talks about the different panels in Photoshop when you first launch a blank document or a document that has a photo. It talks about the tool set over to the left here and about the control panel across the top. So those three areas are your most important areas. It also goes into how to use this textbook and how to load the exercise files to your hard drive and so on and so forth. I believe maybe that might be covered in the area up here, getting started. But it is important that you take some time and take a look at these chapters before you sort of delve in. Using the tools, this kind of goes over the most common tools that you'll use in Photoshop, which are generally your masking tools, your selection tools, and such tools of that nature. It talks about some basic color correction, which you'll be doing a lot of in the course of this class. So it sort of introduces you to a couple areas within Photoshop that you want to get familiar with right away. Sort of helps you organize your panels. Another area that's part of this sort of getting to know your workspace is using the program Adobe Bridge in tandem with Photoshop. I highly recommend it. What it does is it gives you a, let me go ahead and launch it here in the background. It gives you a visual representation of all of your digital files on your hard drive or on your pen drives or wherever you're working from. Like for instance here, it just opened up the Adobe Bridge, and if you can kind of see here, I'm clicked right now on the digital imaging class and I'm looking at the lessons for this particular textbook, and you can sort of see it gives you a nice big preview of each one of the files. You can also click on that preview, and over to the right here you'll see some information about that actual file, like for instance the size of it, physical size as well as file size, different things like about what program created that file and so on and so forth. So the bridge is what I recommend to all students who are getting started with Photoshop as an easy file viewing interface. And then it also allows you to double click a file and it'll automatically open it up over here in Photoshop, as you can kind of see here. And I sort of have Photoshop set up for this lecture, so I just opened that file. I'm going to go ahead and close it. So I will be working on a Mac. All my lectures will be done on a Mac. For those of you on the PC, you're going to have to interpret that to the PC. Sorry, I'm a Mac person. I only have access to Macintosh here on campus. So yes, taking a look at Bridge is pretty important. Also, let's see here. It talks about different things like, common features that are common throughout all the Adobe programs, such as undo, which is Command Z on the Mac. I think it's Control Z on the PC. That's pretty common. It talks about other resources for updates and such. I'm not going to talk too much about that, but one thing I will talk about real quick here is over here in Photoshop. One thing that's nice is if you're stuck in Photoshop or you need to seek out an answer quickly, you can easily pull up the manual for Photoshop by coming up here under the Help menu and pulling down the online Photoshop help. And I'll go ahead and do that. Hopefully my internet is running at a decent speed. Just moments before this lecture, it wasn't running too quick, so I don't want to waste too much time. But what it does do is it brings up, let's see, did it bring, okay, I think it's still downloading the content for this user manual, so we won't spend too much time on that. I'm always sensitive to creating these lectures and not making them too long, because I have to compress them and upload them to YouTube, and I can't have these lectures kind of drone on and on. So I don't like to waste too much time in here. It is still opening up the help menu here on my computer, but let's while it's doing that, let's drop back. So I highly recommend you take a look at the Get to Know Your Workspace area of your textbook. Last week you worked on the layers chapter, so everybody, I provided that for you, and most of you were able to get that finished and uploaded, so you should have some sort of overview of how layers work in Photoshop. If you don't understand layers, I suggest you go through and re-review that chapter, because layers are critical to understanding how to create imagery and to do good work within Photoshop, is that you had to have a good grasp of how layers work. So if you didn't complete that chapter, you need to jump in there and get that finished, because it will be difficult to move on without having a good base understanding of what layers do. So that was last week. This week on the agenda in the textbook is the section 3 on working with selections, and section 6, working with masks and channels. Again, these two chapters of the book are also critical. What you're doing with these chapters, the first one, chapter 4 that you worked on last week, as well as these two chapters 3 and 6 on selections and masks, are building a foundation of knowledge in Photoshop. The foundations of Photoshop are working with layers, working with masks, and dealing with selections. Those are the 3 things you're going to be dealing with the most right off the bat. So it's important that you take your time and work through these chapters. On the first page of each chapter, it tells you how long it should take you to do that particular lesson. I've had students tell me that it takes them less or more time depending on how well you follow directions. So you can plan accordingly to do these lessons. It says that these lessons should take an hour each. Hopefully it doesn't take you longer than that. So that's your textbook, and it's important for you to get that. I think I had a question in the forum at one point about, can I get a digital textbook? Well, absolutely, that's what I have here on the screen, is the digital textbook. And through this service here, CourseSmart, they also provide you the CD lessons somewhere else in here. I mean, you'd have to look up how to get to those, but you can use a digital textbook, and then the publisher you buy that digital textbook from will provide you like a link to access to the CD materials, because this textbook comes with a CD. So if you buy it as an ebook, you'll need access to those lessons. Okay, so that's the textbook portion of the lecture. You will have a progress report due each week stating how you're working through the assignment. Now, what assignment should you be working on, and what one are you talking about here? Back in week 1, so I'm going to drop back 1 here. So going back to assignments and lectures, and going back to week 1 here, you have again, the week 1 problem and solutions. Here, the second listing was your project. And I have it open over here, so I'm going to go ahead and just click it. This is your project. And this is the first project you'll be working on in here. And this is pretty much just an overview of the project, describing what the project is, what you're responsible for in terms of specifications, and what you're going to be doing for the project. And then at the bottom, a basic rubric of how the points are broken down for that project. So last week I just sort of introduced this to you to sort of get you thinking about it. This week I'm asking you to actually put together some process work for this project. So let's bump back here to, all right, so that was available in week 1, and that's under Project 1 handout. That's where you'll get that one. Now going back to the assignments and lectures, and in here to week 2, now each week you'll be asked to produce a progress report of your weekly work on that project. So for this week, the part that you'll be working on is sort of like the conceptual phase or the brainstorming part of the project. So you're responsible for putting together a report. And I notice here that I mentioned you have several options for putting this report together. The most common option that most of you probably have access to is a word processor. What's a word processor? A program like Microsoft Word is a word processor. If you're more of a designer type and you've been taking classes here and you really don't use Microsoft Word much, you can use InDesign. InDesign basically is a desktop publishing program. It can act as a word processor. It can act as a layout program. You can put files together. You can combine image work with written text, and more or less that's what you're going to be doing for this project. You're going to be producing some sketches, and since those sketches will be in your sketchbook, and this is an online class, you're going to have to digitize those sketches somehow. So you have some choices in doing that. You can either use a drawing tablet. We have the tablets available in the Open Lab, which I posted Open Lab hours last week. Or you can create some sort of sketch using a mouse, or a digital montage of some kind. Maybe perhaps you have a collection of images that you're thinking about using for this project, and you arrange them in a random way somehow in some kind of design layout. Of course, you'd have to have some previous experience with Photoshop in order to create a digital montage or a collage. You can also create one with magazine clippings and photograph it or scan it in and post it here on the for this assignment. The other method, as opposed to the drawing tablet and scanning things in from paper, is you can actually photograph your scans and you can post those as well. So in addition to that portion, you also have to write up brief explanations of each one of your sketches so that I understand what it is you're telling me there. Not all sketches are clear, especially if you're not an artist. And I'm not necessarily an artist, but I can do a decent sketch so someone understands what I'm talking about. But as you're learning, you may need to include a brief explanation, and it states there how long that should be. And then you may have some inspirations that influenced your possible ideas for this project. So basically what you're doing, I have some samples back here in Photoshop I'd like to show you, just so you kind of get an idea of what you're doing for the first project. So again, your first report is going to include ideas for this first project. And your first project is this. This is a write-up of your first project, and you will be creating a, I call it a digital matte painting. And you'll be doing that to depict some kind of fantasy or unique environment. So I have a couple of samples back here that students have done for this project, and you can kind of see all three of these examples here are depicting some kind of fantasy environment. Now, all of these include at least 5 to 10 images of different kinds. So if I jump back to the assignment here, where was it? I think it's here. It says students will design a visually interesting composite using multiple photographs, drawings, and or text to depict a fantasy scene or unique environment. Topics for the fantasy environment scene are your choice, but they should remain class appropriate. So you're going to be using found imagery for this. At least in these examples, all of the ones created here in these student examples, the students were able to locate images online and repurpose them for these collages. Okay, so that kind of goes back to your copyright discussion where you were talking about borrowing others' works and reappropriating them in your work. That's what you're going to be doing here. You can also use scans from magazines, you can use scans from books, and or you can also use your own photography here. But a lot of times the best bet for this project is found imagery of some kind, whether it be on the internet or in your personal collection. Okay, so jumping back to the assignment here. All right. So it says here, original images, artwork created by the individual is encouraged, of course, always. However, students can locate found images for this project. Be aware of copyrights associated with the appropriation of found images. So in all bold, I say here, keep track of all research and resources related to borrowing other people's work. You will be responsible for submitting a bibliography citing all sources used for this project. So what that means is if you go on the internet and you do an image search for possible images that you want to use for this project, you want to make sure that you keep track of the location of those images, because you will be responsible for submitting a bibliography for all the images that you use that you did not shoot yourself. Okay. Now that kind of relates back to the copyright discussion we had, where you had to go out and find out what is legal in terms of how can you use other people's works. Another part of that discussion was I had some of the students doing research on locations on the internet that have images for you to use, and hopefully those will be useful in your research for this project. So if you haven't had a chance to go into the discussion and take a look at some of the resources there, please do. I highly recommend it. That's why I had you guys do that discussion, was to help generate resources for this project. Okay, so going back to this, kind of looking at these examples, they're pretty seamless and they look really professional, but these are students just like you who started out in Photoshop and working with found images and creating these sort of fantasy environments. You can kind of see over here, if I click each one of these, you can see that the individual started with a multitude of layers. And they were able to collage those layers together using Photoshop. If I click on this one, you'll see this student actually had more layers than the previous one that you saw there, but it doesn't mean one's better than the other. It's just that this particular individual had more to do to get his fantasy to, I guess, be more believable in this case. And here, looking at this particular student's layers palette, you can sort of see he also had multiple layers in which to do this. So this is your first project, and this is what you're going to be doing. You're going to be doing this at a high resolution, so it's important when you're searching on the web for images that you search for these images in high res. And next week I'll be doing a lecture on working with resolution and how that impacts the quality of your project. Alright, so let's jump back here. So I went over this. So this is your first project you'll be working on. The last thing I'd like to just quickly review is just a simple image search on the internet. You may find this useful. Maybe you already know how to do this, but generally I use Google most of the time when I do image searches in Google. So we'll just bring up Google here. Okay. And let's say you're thinking about doing something that relates to birds. So let's put birds in here. Okay, we're going to search out some birds. And you can go into the images area, and it'll give you a massive collection of images found on the web dealing with birds. However, a large majority of these images are not really useful for this project because the resolution is not high enough. And what I recommend is that you kind of use a specific set of search features in order to target in to the images that can give you the right resolution for this project. So if you're using Google, you type in your search word and then you click images and you get this. And I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this. This is a very common way to search out images on the net. However, over here, you may not have used this feature before, and there's a little button called Search Tools. If you click that, it drills down to some additional features you can use to search for images. Now, this first one is of importance here. If you pull down the size option there, you'll see where it says larger than. And if you pull down to the larger than area, you want to pull down here to at least finding images on the net that are at least 2 MPs or larger, which would be 16 by 1200 in terms of size. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and do that. And notice that the list of images behind me here have changed, okay? Because now it's only showing me images that are within that range of size, okay? Because those types of images are going to be a high enough resolution for this project. Let's see, the other thing that you can do, and you can search out the user rights here as well. Some of these images are labeled for reuse, some not. Some have different criteria associated with how they can be repurposed. For this particular project, as long as you do a citation of someone else's work, you're okay to use it for academic use. This is more or less something you'd be more concerned with if you were doing this for professional use. But since you're a student, you are covered under the fair use clause in terms of copyrights. Let's see. Okay, so that is the most important option you need to select in here. And then if I hover over each one of these images, you'll notice that almost all the images are at least 1600 to 1200 in size. And if I click on one of them, it'll bring me in here, and then I can click View Image, and it'll show me the large size image. Okay, and then once it does that, oops, clicked out of that, then this, you can right mouse click and save this onto your hard drive. Okay, so what some students were doing, just so it's clear, is they were accidentally clicking on this image in this viewing field here, and they were getting a low-res image. Well, you have to click on the View Image option here to the right first, and then from here, Save As to your hard drive, and that'll give you the high-res image. Okay? So just a real quick method on searching out high-res images, because for this project, you're going to need at least 200 DPI. If you bump back again to the assignment criteria here, notice that I say all images should be 500 DPI or higher. I'm sorry, I said 200. I actually changed that for you guys online because I was a little fearful that you might create too large of files. So yes, I actually changed the criteria to 150. Okay, so in order to find images that are high enough and good enough quality, you have to use some of the search features that I just went through with you just then. Okay. In Google, and that's located here under Images, and you click Search Tools, and it gives you size options, and you want to select the MP, 2 MP or higher. Okay? So that should conclude today's lecture. I know I went through a lot of things really fast, but lucky for you, it's recorded and you could stop and play and rewind and review anything that I reviewed here today. So I'm going to go ahead and stop this. Until next time, happy Photoshopping.